I am going to be talking about Filecoin Network as a data commons. And I think I'd like to sort of start by pointing out that while Filecoin Network is relatively nascent, it offers a lot of opportunities in addition to early challenges. And I think one of the most important aspects of it is the sort of innovation of this sort of shared digital space. And so, in this talk, we're going to have a look at what that means and how this ecosystem can mature and grow, and sort of how we can understand that possibility and sort of work to achieve it together. So with that in mind, I'm going to start by kind of giving a little bit of an overview of what a commons is and sort of see why we're using it as the term in this case. So a commons is essentially, at least as we're using it, as an institution for the management of common pool resources. We can think of it in some cases, people think of it as the common pool resources themselves, but I think it's actually particularly important to look at it at the institutional scale, where it accounts for the people, the shared resources, and the process through which those resources are shared. And this tends to be associated with a more ecological sort of systems thinking way of reasoning about processes and people and resources. And in particular, it allows us to have this massive coordination, and even amongst all of the individual challenges, kind of come together to provide a heterogeneous mix of services, build a mix of relationships across many layers to achieve the sort of net effect of a powerful Web3 based cloud system and enable like real world use cases at the same time. So, practically speaking, though, we're working in the context of a digital commons. And this is generally a commons involving the distribution and communal ownership of information, resources, and technology. They tend to be resources which are designed, developed, maintained by the community that's using them. In this case, this is pretty rich because we actually have a pretty wide distribution of resources. It's not necessarily that the platform owns them so much as we work together to allocate them. And a lot of the economic principles inside of Filecoin can be thought of as tools for spreading information around and facilitating coordination, whether that's the allocation of physical capital or data, or even the decision-making processes around the Filecoin improvement process. So if we take this idea of Filecoin Network as a digital commons, we can realize that the community is actually made up of the storage miners, the storage clients, researchers, developers, investors, and actually any of the other types of roles that are emerging as new applications and new workflows are being presented, whether those are lenders or insurers or other providers of like upstack tools that ultimately make this whole ecosystem work better. In this case, we can think of the shared resources as being the hardware, the software, and the data, but also the decision-making processes and infrastructures that are being built on top of this. And they tend to be manifest as software and data, but in some case, they're just like patterns, like market patterns and norms, and these types of resources that we're using are expanding at this time. I think, in fact, particularly quickly because of the sort of upstart nature of this. We got the kind of basics down, but the things that are coming in the future are really going to kind of pour fuel on the fire or sort of accelerate the process. But let's take an emphasis for the moment that it's not just about the people or the resources, but the processes that are used to govern them. And here we're addressing that through a mixture of economic coordination mechanisms, which largely aim to align the incentives, not just between participants, but over time, to make sure that there aren't necessarily incentives to sort of act quickly or in a high frequency mode at the cost of the long-term health of the system. And these concepts of sustainability, even economic sustainability, are part of the reason we use this commons framing, because it's not just about the individuals and the entities participating now, but making sure that the thing is growing and maturing and healthy in the future. And that's also part of the important aspect of the Filecoin improvement process, because ultimately no economic mechanisms that are enshrined in code can necessarily be perfect forever. We would imagine any aspect of the Filecoin system being sort of subject to a slow evolution over time in response to the participants in that system itself across the wide range of roles that they fulfill, but in a way that's predictable and not subject to sort of being jerked around. And in the nutshell, this is why we think of Filecoin as a commons, and in particular digital commons. But what's kind of cool about this is that it has the opposite property that is maybe traditionally associated with the tragedy of the commons. Because it's digital in nature, there's a sort of feed forward effect or a positive externality where participating in the Filecoin network creates more value for the other participants. New applications or new workflows being added creates more value. And this comes in the form of the introduction of lenders and insurers, or data applications that actually turn the data of the Filecoin network itself into powerful data streams that will serve the operational automations or the reputation and discovery aspects of the users up stack. So in a nutshell, what makes this so cool is that we don't really have a tragedy of the commons. We have a sort of triumph of the commons thanks to the digital nature. And that doesn't mean that there aren't real physical resources and there aren't constraints, but by working to build governance through economic mechanisms and improvement procedures, we actually allow that system to kind of work for everyone over time. And I think it's a really important application of these sort of institutional frameworks around commons. And that what I like about it the most is that it allows us some insight into what we might be able to do to grow this ecosystem, and we could all benefit from that growth. And so, kind of to the topics brought up earlier, we have these emergence of DeFi primitives, liquidity pools, lending protocols, insurance contracts that can be serviced to mitigate risk or even just reallocate that across time scales. So someone who wants to sort of manage a mining pool might need to offload some risk in the form of insurance contracts, or they might need to borrow tokens. And in doing so, they actually change their own sort of risk reward profile, but they're sort of paying someone else to bear that. And in this sense, the conservation's there. We haven't made anything go away, but we've allowed participants to experience it in a distribution that's more fitting for them. And this sort of concept kind of extends well beyond financial applications to things very data focused. Filecoin Plus and verified data, the integration with data markets, and even sort of data DAOs, and in a sense like sub DAOs, organizations around specific data sets and their collection and maintenance. I'm a particular fan of this Merkle Forest idea, where we're looking at the way that data is linked and interrelated using the power of content addressable DHTs. And I also have some soft spot for being able to verify computation on data and create chains of reference and context. So these are kinds of areas that I'm the most interested in, but that's because I'm a data scientist. Others are interested in building out reputation services and discovery platforms. And I had the pleasure of giving a talk a little bit earlier during the summit about these kinds of reputation systems and quality metrics. And we can probably check out the recording if you're interested. And then finally, some really critical applications in the cross-platform integrations will make it possible for people to experience the file storage from the Filecoin system in a Web2 compatible way. In particular, sort of having Dropbox or Google Drive-like experiences, but it's going to take some time to build up that infrastructure. And the more that it gets built, the more users will end up using the system, and the sort of growth of our commons will continue in a very reasonable and sustainable way, as opposed to in a way that sort of undermines or takes away from the other users. So, kind of tying it back to the first point, we have the emerging bridges to Web3, things like wrapped Filecoin sort of enable these liquidity pools and lending protocols. So, and these are just some ideas. I think the thing that's most exciting about this is that there's a degree of freedom for ideation, discovery, trial and error, sort of build this commons together. So with that, I just thank you for having me here, and I look forward to building with all of you.